the brunt of his father's anger. Even as a child, Brian showed an excessive interest in sex.
We had a book at home that had explicit pictures of the genitalia, you know, and he promptly proceeded to play doctor in a little hut in the backyard with the neighborhood kids, and that got him, we got a little feedback from their parents for that.
Brian's accomplice, Wanda Baze, grew up on the other side of Salt Lake. With her father away on business, Wanda was brought up by her mother, and from an early age she developed a disquieting sense of insecurity.
Wanda was always bashful and clung to me whenever we were in public. She would have to stand by me and hang on to my leg. So she always felt more secure if she hanging on to Mommy.
By the age of 13, Brian was the black sheep in the Mitchell family. He got into drugs and alcohol, and by his first year at high school, Brian was caught preying upon very young girls.
A little neighbor girl came in the house, and he exposed himself to her, and that's what started his trouble with juvenile authorities. And he met some unsavory characters in juvenile detention, and things went from bad to worse.
Wanda's attentions were more wholesome. She was a committed Mormon. When her first marriage of 20 years broke down, Wanda found herself in counseling, and it was there that she met Brian Mitchell. 18 months later, she was married. Brian and Wanda devoted their lives to God. The current teachings of the Mormon Church did not satisfy Brian. He adopted out-of-favor beliefs, which cast him as the Lord and Master, with the right to take multiple wives. Brian displayed disturbing signs of sadism towards his new stepdaughter.
She had a pet rabbit named Peaches. One night they were feeding her something. She asked what was for dinner. I told her chicken, and she ate it. And they didn't have any. They had something else. And the next day she asked where her rabbit was, and they said, "You ate it." They cooked it and fed it to her.
Brian and Wanda were becoming increasingly fervent.
They woke me up, and their eyes were like big, and I almost thought they were on acid. And they're like, "Mark, we have to tell you something." And in Brian's weird, soft voice, he's like, "We saw angels tonight," you know. I'm just like, "Whoa, really?" They're like, "Yes, we saw the angels of the Lord. They've spoken to us."
Their revelations told Brian and Wanda to leave Salt Lake and develop survival skills. 3 years later, they returned with a manifesto and a mission. She was Elada, and he, Emmanuel David Isaiah. On November the 16th, to mark Elizabeth's 15th birthday, a concert was held in her memory. It was now 4 weeks since Mary Catherine had told her father that it was Emmanuel who'd abducted Elizabeth. And the family were increasingly angry at the police's reluctance to take action.
We discussed going public. Like I said, we did not feel like Emmanuel was a strong suspect based on the logic of the whole thing. We were concerned about creating a false frenzy.
A lot of us, especially Tom and I, and a lot of our siblings were just like, okay, they've had enough time, let's go public with this. Let's go and do this now.
That's when all of a sudden things started to fall apart with the police.
Week by week, I personally felt like, you know, I was losing grasp on what this person looked like, because initially it was like it came right back to me, but it was fading and fading, and I worried that I wouldn't be able to come up with something. There was about a 5 or 6 week period of time that went by, and when I finally started doing a sketch.
Fortuitously for Brian David Mitchell, in his kidnap scheme, when he went to work for the Smarts, he was a clean-cut preacher named Emmanuel. And the composite drawing of Emmanuel wouldn't have ever caught him.
In October, before the search for Emmanuel had even begun, Elizabeth was taken to Salt Lake City bus station. With her veil tied tightly across her face, she boarded a bus and left her hometown and fast-approaching winter behind her. The long journey took Elizabeth hundreds of miles away to Lakeside, a small cowboy town in Southern California.
If you were living on the streets, Lakeside would be an optimal place to be. A sort of area where outward unusual appearance does not necessarily draw undue attention to oneself. So if someone were to blend into an area of San Diego County and have a relatively easy time of it, I would suspect that Lakeside would be a choice.
We started calling them the Worshippers because they were dressed so odd, like something out of a Cecil B. DeMille biblical movie.
They usually had a veil that would cover them like that with their hat, so all you could see were their eyes.
Talking to him, I asked him, why are the women veiled? Are you Muslim? And real quickly, see, the women never answered themselves. It was always him that talked. He answered, these women are veiled to protect them from the sins of the world. And at that point, I went, oh, of course.
Well, they came into the park, and at that point we discovered they weren't Arabs because he was walking around with a Bible trying to raise money. Had really piercing eyes.
There's no law that says you can't be dressed different, you can't look different. And in this country, people are to have religious freedom. And we have to also respect, not have to, but we do respect cultural diversity and ethnic diversity. And it would be out of the question just to simply walk over and pull their veil off just to identify them.
I received a radio call of aggressive panhandlers. So I asked for his personal information, and he gave me his name as David Sherlson. He identified the older lady as Alada Sherlson, his wife, and the young girl as Esther Sherlson, and said that she was his daughter. And I ran the names and dates of birth that he gave me through their computer system. There was nothing on them.
In Lakeside, Elizabeth lived with her kidnappers in the bottom of a dried-out riverbed. They slept on the ground in a tucked-away camp, under the cover of brush and rough tarpaulin.
Brian David Mitchell is a very manipulative human being. On the one hand, he uses his belief to draw attention to himself when he feels that necessary, to gain shelter, money, food, clothing, but he also uses it as a way to have people stay away from him. When you engage him in conversation, certainly as law enforcement, he'll take off on a tirade, and that gives him a bit of insulation from further investigation.
Edward, Tinkerbell, come on.
It was now the new year, 8 months since Elizabeth was taken.
Both Mom and Dad have been so wonderful to us, and so understanding, and so considerate.
The Smarts were increasingly frustrated at the police's reluctance to publicize Emmanuel as a suspect. They started planning to go it alone.
Finally, we got to a point where, you know, enough time is enough time. And whether you like it or not, we're going forward. It wasn't even so much the sketch as the story of this homeless preacher. That was what we wanted to hear.
I talked with him about where he was from, what he was doing. He indicated to me that he was from all over, that he was going about the country from homeless shelter to homeless shelter, preaching born-again Christianity.
By almost shotgun blasting that press conference out to the public, it hit the one person that it needed to hit, Emmanuel's sister. When she read about this street preacher named Emmanuel who occasionally did handiwork on homes, a chill went down her back. That's my brother. She called in and she said to the police, I want this to be anonymous, but I know who that is, and his name's Brian David Mitchell. The Smart family was unequivocal in that we need to find this guy. Tom particularly got maniacal about it. What Tom did was he jumped inside the investigation, whether the police or the FBI wanted him there or not, and most of them didn't. He wouldn't take no for an answer, and he became absorbed with the investigation. And what the police couldn't or wouldn't tell him, he'd go find out another way.
Tom called Brian Mitchell's sister. Her husband gave him key information.
Lisa, this is Tom Smart. I am Elizabeth Smart's uncle, and I guess that there's a guy that we've been looking for. He calls himself Emmanuel, I guess, dressed up like Jesus. Personally, I would be very, very surprised if he did have anything to do with it, but he's just crazy enough, and that there's possibilities. You know that he does have a teepee that he's had up in the mountains, but he has never, ever let any of the family know where. Right. If he really does have something to do with it, there's a really good chance that she's still alive.
Tom scoured Salt Lake looking for Brian Mitchell. He discovered the cafe that the trio had frequented.
I went to all 3 soup and salads and took posters down, and I talked to one of the managers there, and she says, "Oh yeah, Mary and Joseph. You know, the last time I saw him, he was with a woman and a girl." I said, "Do you think that girl's Elizabeth?" And she said, "Yeah, I think it could be." And it took me to my knees. I dropped like a lightning bolt, and I just thought, my God, she's out there.
If he has her, she is still alive. And that was the thing that just exploded.
Good evening. We start off...
America's Most Wanted ran the story.
The Smarts were hoping someone would recognize this face, and someone did. Police got a call from a woman who...
Now we knew there was a man by the name of Brian David Mitchell, that he was a street person, that when Lois Smart had brought him to the house to work, he was clean shaven. He had a short haircut. She met him downtown. He took a bus up himself to the house to work on the roof. And Ed remembered it. And Mary Catherine wasn't making it up. And there was a guy, and his name was Brian David Mitchell. So now we wanted to hunt for Brian David Mitchell.
Oblivious to the national media coverage, the San Diego police had Brian Mitchell in custody.
Brian David Mitchell spent 3 days in the local jail. He had broken into a local Presbyterian church. He was charged. He was seen in court. The judge assigned a restitution